All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining today. I am very excited to be here to talk to you guys about this really important and timely topic. But first, I just want to give a little bit of a summary or an explanation of what the Belonging Project is. The word Ubuntu became popular worldwide during apartheid, when Bishop Desmond Tutu explained a philosophy in multiple South African ethnic groups that our humanity derives from the humanity of the collective. Ubuntu symbolizes the universal bond we have as a people and the focus on collective responsibility. Just as the pandemic has illustrated how interdependent we are, this collective is focused on working together to move forward in our shared commitment to improving inclusion and diversity in the legal industry. We believe that we rise and fall together. Built on this concept, the Belonging Project is a collaborative network of professional and personal support for diverse legal talent across industry organizations, law firms, and law firms. Through the Belonging Project, we are offering opportunities and programs to support diverse law students and lawyers during the pandemic. This initiative will contribute to diversity in the legal profession and encourage others to contribute and leverage their expertise and resources. In collaboration with our industry partners, we will offer webinars focused on professional and personal development, one-on-one coaching, and a curated resource center devoted to well-being and professional growth. So, getting started today on the power of privilege and how to be an ally for systemic culture change. There we go. So this cartoon was in the New Yorker a few weeks ago, and I think it really nails where we are as a society right now. We are finally having real conversations about diversity and inclusion across the country. But that's not enough. It's not enough to just recognize and discuss it. We need to do something about it. It's kind of like we're really late to the party and everybody else has already started drinking and having fun and dancing. And we're wondering why nothing's happening, why we're not included, we're not there yet. So I think that in order to really identify what we can do to change, we really need to ask ourselves what to do to create the lasting change, not just having a conversation here and there, but lasting change. And I'll say, if you want to do this, be prepared for a long game. This isn't going to happen overnight. Dismantling centuries of institutional racism and policies designed to keep people held back from the majority is going to take a lot of work, a lot of effort, and a lot of time. So before we get too far into the presentation and discuss topics that are going to be somewhat heavy, I want you to do a mindset check. And I apologize in advance if this seems a little touchy-feely for people. Sometimes people do. But I want you to close your eyes and take a deep breath. And exhale any anxieties that you have with you today. Let go of the thoughts about that project that you have to do later today, or that email that you need to write. Just breathe. And then open your eyes and think. And look at where you are at right now, mentally and emotionally. What mindset are you bringing to the table? Because how you enter a conversation and how you leave a conversation is more important than what happens in the conversation. So understanding and acknowledging your mindset and being mindful of your thoughts and how your mindset is coloring how you are taking this information, is impacting how you are processing this. So be very, very mindful about that. So in order for us to really have an impactful conversation, we really should make sure that we are on the same page as far as language. We want to make sure that the words we use are common and known to all of us, and not assume that we know what everybody is talking about. So first we have these 4 core terms: diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And these are really the foundation of this work, of DEI and anti-racist work. Diversity, simply put, is the presence of differences. These are things that make you different from your sister or your brother or the person across the street. It is just a presence of any type of difference. Equity is how we address some of the disparities that exist because of those differences, right? It is how can we make sure everyone has access to the resources and the skills that they need in order to survive. Now, it's not making sure everybody has the same, because the same for me isn't going to be as helpful as the same for somebody else. We're not going to be on level playing field. So equity is really about identifying what an individual needs in order to succeed and helping them achieve that. Inclusion is the process of how we leverage those differences, right? And how we make people feel included and welcomed and that they have a voice. Now, in the middle is belonging. And this is something that takes all of those ideas: diversity, equity, and inclusion. And all of those have to be present in order for belonging to happen. And that is where you feel like you are actually a part of an organization, not only that you're heard, not that you have a seat at the table, but that you are actually valued and people see you and value you and your contributions. And belonging is a basic human need, just like food and water. It really helps us identify how we fit into the bigger picture, and it helps us deal with stress and painful emotions that we come across. So a couple of other words that we're going to come up today, I really want to briefly talk about them. The first is identity. And somewhat similar to diversity, identity are all of the things that kind of make up you. All of the things that have impacted you, things that you have gone through, whether it is your race or your gender, whether it is the fact that you're a mom or you're single. Maybe you grew up in a very rural area, or maybe you grew up in a larger city. All of these things come together to help make you who you are. And it really determines how you enter the world, how you see the world, and how you interact with it. Microaggressions are these daily, sometimes unknowing acts of aggression that are perpetuated against diversity and minority people. Harvard psychiatrist Chester Pierce coined this term in 1970, and he really kind of called it subtle blows that are delivered incessantly. So it could be just one paper cut, and ow, it kind of hurts, but it's not a big deal. But the continuing of the paper cuts day after day starts to add up. It is literally death by 1,000 cuts. It really impacts not only the person who is the target of microaggressions, but it also is a danger to the people who are around, the people who see the microaggression, may not really understand it, but then they become racially socialized to internalize that bias and think, oh, okay, that's how they act with that person. So that means ABC. So now I'm going to start treating that like ABC. So for example, a white woman walking down the street and a black man is coming towards her, and she kind of grips her purse a little bit tightly and walks faster, signaling that the black man is dangerous. Maybe her child was walking with her and saw that. Now that child is going to start equating black people with danger. And as they grow up, that is going to come out in their behavior and their activities. Next is implicit bias or unconscious bias. So taking these two words apart, you have implicit, which is kind of unknown. It's just something that's implied. It's not really out there and named. And so it's kind of in your subconscious mind. Now, bias is really just a preference. It's a preference that you have for something or against something. If you have a brain, you have a bias. Nobody is bias free. For example, I have a bias against onions because they're disgusting. If I am at a restaurant and I'm looking at a menu and I think that, oh gosh, I really love this dish. You know, I've had it somewhere else. I love it. This is what I'm going to get. But then as I read the description a little bit more closely, I see they put onions in it, and I'm like, oh no, I'm out. I'm sorry. So that is my bias against onions. Now, what's different between that and the implicit bias is that I know that I have a bias against onions. I know, like I know when it's triggered. I know when I'm reacting to it, and it's seen. It's very visible. With implicit bias, this is something that is kind of been ingrained in you, and it is something that you have learned and picked up, just kind of like with those microaggressions. You have seen how people interact in the world, and you have internalized that bias for you. One of the things to really make sure we understand is that bias can create real world problems, right? It can manifest itself in a very negative way. Bias does not mean discrimination. Bias does not mean you're racist, okay? If you act on a bias in a discriminatory way, then that is a problem. But just having a bias does not mean you're a bad person. Everybody has a bias. So it can lead to discrimination and racism, but it's a correlation, not a causation. One of the really funny things that I always like to see, my mother-in-law, God love her, she is on Facebook, and she always posts or sends these little memes to everybody, and it says, if you can read this, you are one in the top 1% of intelligent people in all the world. And it has, you know, letters like right here that are all jumbled up. Well, and I don't want to burst her bubble, and I don't want to hurt her, but everybody can read that. It does not make you the smartest person in the world. And that's because that implicit bias that you have is kind of like mental shortcuts. Your according to the information system theory of how your brain works, your brain uses a type of predictive behavior, a type of predictive processing, and basically it's lazy. And in order to conserve energy, when it sees things that tend to be a pattern, or sees things that they may recognize as something that they've seen before, they will kind of go on autopilot, so to speak, and they will fill in all of those gaps for you without taking the time to process every single bit of information. So for example, I am sure, at least I hope for sure, everybody is able to read these jumbled letters. If you look at them individually, all of the letters individually, it's a mess. You can't understand it. But as you just kind of take a quick look, your brain is starting to rearrange things because it's recognizing something, and it's experienced that before. So it is creating that action for you, so you don't have to think so hard about it. Now, we can't really talk about systemic racism or systemic culture change if we don't talk about systemic racism and white privilege. And I know that these sometimes are really cringy words and they land very hard, but it's important for everybody to acknowledge that it exists and try to understand it. So for example, white privilege refers to the societal benefits that white people have that non-white people do. Recognizing it in yourself, just like with bias, recognizing that you have it does not make you racist. It does not make you a bad person, because it's not about you. It's not about anything you have done. It's about the system and how the system benefits certain people over others. Peggy McIntosh described white privilege as an invisible package of unearned assets. And by this, we don't mean physical assets or that white people haven't had to work as hard as other people to get where they are. It just means that I, as a white person, can go shopping alone without feeling like I'm being followed because I might steal something or I look sketchy. It means I can turn on the TV and I can see myself reflected in characters on the screen without having to specifically search out a show or a channel in order to find somebody that looks like me. And unlike Ahmaud Arbery, I can go walking or running in a neighborhood and be seen as if I belong there and that I'm not a threat and I don't have to fear being attacked. That is white privilege. It is how the world interacts with me because of who I am and because of the color of my skin. Now, a lot of these privileges are built into systemic racism. Systemic racism refers to the long history of racially distributed resources and institutions in the United States and all of the policies that have kept it in place. Okay, it is these ideas that have come from things like slavery, Indian reservations, internment camps, segregation. Now, while most of these institutions no longer exist, they have had long-term impacts on who we are and how people think. While many laws were passed in the 20th century making these things discriminatory, there are still a lot of inequalities because centuries of this systemic racism is not going to be erased overnight. There are still these thoughts and these feelings and these actions that have been conditioned because of all of these laws, policies, and institutions. So what specifically is systemic racism and how does it look? Originally, racism or white supremacy was thought of as overt behaviors and organizations that like the KKK, like the neo-Nazis that you see on the screen. But recently, sociologists have begun to encourage us to think of white supremacy as an ideology, as a collection of ideas, to encourage us to value and center whiteness, right? White norms, white culture, white people. So consider this pyramid graphic that you see, but I want you to think of it more like an iceberg, okay? The tip of the iceberg is visible. So I'm coasting along in my boat and I see an iceberg straight ahead. I see it. I can easily identify it. I can name it and say, that's bad. I need to avoid that. So those are things like the KKK, like lynching, like swastikas, like cross burning. The trouble is that, as we all know, icebergs are a lot bigger than what we see. You don't know what is beneath the surface. You can't see it. It's unknown. You don't know how big it is. And that, the underneath the waterline, is what causes the most damage. It is the foundation of the iceberg. It is what keeps the tip of the iceberg in place. All of the things underneath, those covert, socially acceptable, engaged upon daily activities, build the foundation that allows the tip of the iceberg to stay in place. Okay? So one of the things that you can also look at is not necessarily specific overt actions like the KKK, but anything that you see that you are like, oh, that's not good. So take, for example, police brutality. Take, for example, the George Floyd tragedy. You see police killing a Black man. You see police using brutality against other Black men. You see there is excessive force against peaceful protesters. So that is the tip of the iceberg. That's what you see and that you can name it. But underneath, there is a whole iceberg that has allowed that to happen. That is perpetuating fear of Black people. That is believing and acting like we're post-racial because we've had one Black president, or Oprah is a gazillionaire. So all of these things, these underlying things, the school to prison pipeline, you know, discrimination, teaching people of color to fear us. That is what is holding the tip of the iceberg up and allows these overt racial acts to occur. So it's really easy to see um, how somebody who may not necessarily consider themselves a racist can be actively engaged in a racist system. But how does that show up? How does that show up in your life? How does that show up in your organization? Well, it shows up in culture. And culture defines what is considered normal. It provides standards that you judge others by. For example, the standard of what professional is or what successful is. These norms are more familiar and come more naturally to people from white traditional Western countries and experiences. So that's why we call it white culture. And so when you look at it from an organizational perspective, the culture is policies, procedures, programs, processes that are built around certain values, beliefs, assumptions, and customs. So think about your organization right now. What does your organization see as a culture fit? What makes a good employee? What makes somebody successful and promotable? What does professionalism look like in your company? And how do you know that? How do you know that that is the standard? Who told you, right? A lot of times these things are unwritten. They are assumed because white people, unfortunately, are the ones who are normally in power. And we have our own perception of what that is. And that is what we instill in our organizations. And we don't leave much room for any other cultures or any other norms or standards to come in. So it's not a very inclusive environment. For example, like if a diverse employee comes in, yes, you are celebrating that you have diversity, but you are forcing them to conform to the already existing norms. You're not allowing them to really bring in their whole self to work, which, you know, leads to stress, anxiety, burnout. And so it's really important to make sure that we are valuing people and we're not forcing people to hide a part of themselves in order to assimilate to the culture. So Temu Ukun, I think I pronounced her name right, did all this research and wrote about 15 different white culture norms that exist in organizations. So I'm just going to go through a few of them that I think are fairly prevalent right now. Now, understand not all aspects of white culture are bad, right? Like it's not an either or. This isn't a binary choice. But when they are perpetuated unknowingly and when they are the norm without being discussed or talked about, when they're the default, that's when it becomes a problem. So the first is perfectionism. Perfectionism really refers to how you appreciate people in the workplace and how you treat mistakes. So in a perfectionist culture, for the most part, there's not a lot of appreciation given to people for works done. There's more feedback on what goes wrong as opposed to what goes right. There is a focus more on seeing a person who makes a mistake as subpar instead of just seeing it as a mistake and an opportunity to learn from the mistake. There's not a lot of time or energy or effort to create a learning organization where you can really identify things that have gone wrong, how you can fix it, and improve it moving forward. There's a lot of nitpicking. People see flaws in everything and vocalize them. And these cultures, this perfectionism culture is really internalized by people. They begin to see failures in themselves. They fail to recognize their own attributes and their own value skills that they add. They also start to feel really stressed, and that is just reinforced by the culture that, okay, yeah, I am not good enough. They keep bragging on me, like I can't do anything right. And so it's just this really, really vicious cycle. And it's important to note that many studies have shown that people of color are always held to a higher standard than white people when it comes to mistakes, when it comes to quality of work. For example, Dr. Erin Reeves, who is a diversity inclusion consultant, she did a study where she had one memo. It was the exact same memo. There was a certain number of mistakes in the memo, just grammatical mistakes, bad word choices, formatting, and she put the name of an obviously white person, John Smith, and one with a more of an ethnic sounding name, not necessarily saying that they were a person of color, but knowing that people will assume that this is a person of color. And she sent out one of either letter to CEOs, to chairs in law firms across the country. And when she got the results back, she saw that overwhelmingly the person with the ethnic or black sounding name had 70% more grammatical errors found. They were judged a lot more harshly. They were being referred to as, they're mediocre, or, oh gosh, this person really needs a lot of work, or they went to what law school? And then the white sounding name in their memo was referred to as, wow, this person has a lot of potential. You know, we'd really have to invest some time, but you know, they're definitely a great asset to any company. There's so much potential there. So again, it's that it's the fact that the difference of standards makes perfectionism very, very difficult for an inclusive environment. Individualism. This is more of a focus on the person or over a group. So not necessarily looking at the good of the whole, but looking at a single person. And there's a focus on a single source of power, right? Which leads to people seeking the spotlight and making themselves look good at the expense of others. So it's a very, very competitive environment. And it really is more of when, you know, autonomy is favored, right? Like I just want you to go out and do the work. I don't want to have to answer any questions for you. I don't want to provide you any guidance. I just need you to go out and do the work. And if you can't hack it, then I'm sorry, you're out. So there's that very individualistic type of feeling in organizations that really value that really are a competitive type of environment. And I think we can all agree that law firms are pretty competitive. So we really, really need to work on addressing this and fixing this. I think another important part about meritocracy, about individualism, is that it's very, very closely linked to meritocracy. And I am going to read a passage really, really quick, because I think that this really explains meritocracy and the problem with meritocracy. And this is from White Privilege by Robin DiAngelo. She says, meritocracy is a precious ideology in the United States, but neighborhoods and schools are demonstrably not equal. They are separate and unequal. Tax bases, school resources, curricula, textbooks, opportunities for extracurricular activities, and the quality of the teaching staff differ widely between school districts. Who is not aware that in the United States, schools are vastly unequal? Without white people's interest or effort invested in changing a system that serves them at the expense of others, advantage is passed down from generation to generation. Rather than change these conditions so that public education is equal for all, we allow other people's children to endure conditions that would be unacceptable for our own. And I think that is a great example of that individualism idea and behavior that leads to inequality. And it will definitely lead to inequality in your organization as well. Defensiveness. This is when people are confronted with any type of criticism or mistake. They tend to get extremely defensive and push back. It's seen as impolite. It's seen as rude, right? It's the thing that you kind of tiptoe around, or instead of providing feedback on something an employee or a student wrote, you're like, okay, I'll just fix it. It's just easy for me to fix it. I don't want to get them all defensive. And that also links to the fear of open conflict, because there is that big emphasis on being polite and fear of bringing up difficult topics. And these two are really, really toxic, because the defensiveness and the fear of having these difficult discussions leads to an extremely oppressive culture. Especially if it comes around areas of bias and harassment. They get really defensive, or they're like, okay, well, I don't want to talk about this. Go to HR. I don't want to talk about this. So it's really, really important that is getting over. Like, you have to have these difficult conversations, and instead of getting really defensive when approached by a criticism, a negative feedback on something, take a deep breath and try to understand that they're not attacking you as a person. They're trying to help you learn, and they're trying to create opportunity for you to correct and make a difference moving forward. And then finally, a lot of that also leads into the right of comfort. And this is when basically more value is given to white people or people in power over other people. So again, we don't want to talk about certain things, right? We don't want to talk about white privilege because that makes me really uncomfortable. So even though, bias and racism is really, really important to minorities, is really, really important to people of color, it makes me really uncomfortable. So I am not going to allow any kind of conversation around that here. So it's valuing the comfort of others and the attitude of others over addressing problems, over addressing some of these systemic issues that are happening. All right. So moving on, let's talk about allies, and we're going to start looking at how allies play into the system, and what we can do both personally and in our communities to help counteract some of this, to help break down some of these walls and these cultural norms. So allies, there are definitely a few different types, and it really depends on where people are in their journey to allyship, where people are in their mindset. There is, one who is not an ally. They are like, I have no regard for other people. I don't want, I don't care. I'm in my own happy bubble. All the way up to, I've done a lot of research and I've learned a lot about the real history of Blacks in America, and I'm ready to educate others and advocate for change. That is the epitome of an ally. And that's not a self-described label. You cannot just call yourself an ally, right? You actually have to put in the work, and other people have to recognize you as an ally and verbally confirm your allyship to their culture. I think it's also important too, and according to the Guide to Allyship, which is this wonderful open source document where a lot of sociologists and D&I professionals come in and add all of these different tips and thoughts about allyship. And one of the quotes really, really kind of hit me. A marginalized individual cannot easily cast away the weight of their identity shaped through oppression on a whim. An ally understands that this is a weight that they too must be willing to carry and never put down. And that's really important. And I think that's really impactful, because that's what this work is. It's hard. And you are going to carry a lot of weight, and you are going to experience a lot of pain and difficulty around this. And when we also are looking at allyship, and you're looking out in the communities, there are a couple of different kinds of allies that do kind of fall along the spectrum. The first is what I call optical allyship. And this is when the actions of somebody is more of a way to show others that they're woke, right? That's retweeting or posting contextless MLK quotes without really doing the work to dig into his actual beliefs and what he thought about protesting. It's participating in movements like putting up a Black background on your profile picture and being like, okay, I support you, and that's it. I'm done. I don't really have to do anything else because I've already shown you that I support you. Let's go. That is optical allyship, or sometimes it's called performative allyship, when the actions that you're doing are not for the benefit of the underrepresented, and the marginalized, but it's more for your own ego. It's more for your own visibility in the community or in the organization. But then there's also what we call a partnership, and that is up at that level 5 on the scale. Someone who is accountable for maintaining consistent engagement and advocacy on behalf of the marginalized individuals, checking in with oneself to make sure that they are addressing their own biases, and they are helping people carry the load of oppression that they have been under. Now, there are definitely obstacles to allyship, whether these are, and a lot of these are internalized. There are unclear motivations, wondering why you're really an ally. You can't be an effective ally if you want to be an ally for others because you want to save them. You're not a white savior. That is a wrong way to be an ally, and it's not going to work. Additionally, you can't be a good ally if you want to do it because you feel sorry for people. That is not a good, strong motivation for being an ally, and it's not going to work. There's also being unsure what to do. A lot of times you're like, I don't know what to say. I don't want to make anybody upset. I don't want to, I don't know what to do. So that's definitely an obstacle. It's also not realizing that there are different perspectives. Just like everybody is unique, everybody has differences. The way one person experiences the oppression in their life does not mean everybody else in their group will have the same experience and the same perception of that. So instead of kind of having this blanket generalization that, all people of color feel like this, it's understanding that there are differences and each individual has their own way of dealing and responding to certain things because of their identity, because of where they grew up. It's not just about the color of their skin. They have all of these different identities that provides the lens that they see the world through. Also, not recognizing our own biases. If we can't do the inner work and look inside ourselves and really acknowledge where we have blind spots and what we need to do in order to overcome these, is going to be definitely a big roadblock. And then courage. It's going to take courage and bravery and vulnerability to be an ally. It's not easy. It's hard work. It's exhausting. It's traumatic sometimes. And you might be even losing friends over it. I know I've lost several friends, especially in these past few months, because of my views, and I'm being very, very vocal about my views and my support and what I do. You could also alienate some family members, unfortunately, but that's the price, and it's also an opportunity to continue to engage people, to try and train or educate others on how to be an ally and why this work is really, really important. So now that we kind of have an understanding of allies, what do they look like in this system? What do they look like in the white culture, and what can they do in order to help and disrupt and dismantle some of these things? Well, first, you really need to do your own self-work, just like we talked about in the obstacles to allyship, recognizing your own biases. You need to do the internal work first. Otherwise, you are not going to be successful or be able to provide a lot of support and allyship to others. So first, get comfortable with being uncomfortable. And I know we hear this a lot lately. It's the uncomfortable is the new comfortable, right? So you really need to objectively look inside, look at yourself. What do you do that helps perpetuate some of these biases, these microaggressions, these systemic racist institutions and policies? Look at where you get your information from. What news channel do you watch? Which paper do you read? Is it all very, very focused on one side over another? Is it confirming your own preconceived notions so that you have a little bit of confirmation bias in there? That's probably a good red flag, actually, of saying, okay, I need to broaden my horizons. I need to learn more from different sources. I can't just stay in this lane. Also, expanding your social circle. Now, establishing a friendship may not be some grand overture that is going to solve racism overnight, but it really is probably one of the most significant things that you can do. Cross-racial friendships are imperative to doing this work. One of the most damaging parts of oppression is making others feel like they don't matter. And if there's a true friendship there, then that is negated. Also, friendship is also a great way for you to continue to do your ally work, because then you get some firsthand experience of what they go through from day to day. You are able to be a little bit closer to that, so you can see how it manifests and what you can do and how you can change things. So when you're making friends with people who have a different culture, it's also important to be very sensitive and patient, because there is such a long history of this oppression. A lot of people don't trust people that don't look like them, especially people of color. I've given a couple of speeches before, and one was specifically on cross-racial friendships. And a lot of the women of color in the room were like, yeah, I don't trust white people. I don't. And it's because these systems have continued to hold them back and benefit others. There's too many of these performative allies, these optical allies, who aren't really doing the work and aren't paying attention. So really expanding and making true friendships and relationships with people from a different culture is important. And being intentional on social media, and not just social media, but just media in general. Look at, if you see a post, and again, that confirmation bias that comes in, you see a post and you're like, oh yeah, that's the ticket. Stop and think. Check it out. Do some research. Don't just post things because you see it. That is not a way to disseminate important information. Think about, your Black friends. Like, how, if I reposted this, how would this land on them? What would the impact be? And as far as media, maybe write a letter to your local editor of your newspaper, or call your local TV station if you feel that there has been biased coverage of something, or no coverage at all. Or even the way that people of different cultural backgrounds have been portrayed as opposed to white people. So there's definitely a voice and definitely a power that we have in order to affect these change, in order to call something out. It's important for us to use that power. Also on social media, and I sometimes get really exhausted and tired by this, but if I see somebody post something that is just flat out ignorant, I engage, and I do it nicely and I do it comfortably, but I have to do something to interrupt that. I have to do something to show that I support, and I have to do something that maybe just gets somebody to think, be like, okay, yeah, maybe that's wrong, maybe that isn't right. I don't know if it works, but I know that it is something that, being an upstander, I have to intervene and I have to say something, as opposed to just kind of being that bystander. It's like, oh, I'm just going to keep on scrolling past that. So definitely make sure that you are practicing that in social media and in real life. And then just, gosh, educate yourself. Become aware of different perspectives. Become aware of things that are important to people that don't look like you. Don't only read stories about, slavery and civil rights. There are other great stories that come from Black and African American culture that are strong and powerful. So really kind of take a look at what you read, what you listen to, what you watch. here are just a couple of really good examples that I know that provide a really great window into what's going on. James Baldwin is amazing. He's fantastic. You've got Toni Morrison. Ta-Nehisi Coates' Between the World and Me is an extremely powerful testament to being Black in America. Becoming by Michelle Obama, she just started her podcast just a couple of days ago on Spotify. So if you haven't listened to it, it's really good. Again, it's just discovering what Blackness means, how that has impacted her relationships, and how it has brought people together. So it's not all doom and gloom. It really is a celebration. So really take a look and see what things you're consuming. Now, once you've kind of done the inside work and the internal work, then you can start to look at, okay, systemically, what can I do? What can I do in my organization? Well, first and foremost is you need to identify what those white norms are. There are always going to be white norms in culture, and you need to name them and you need to identify them. And like I said, not all white norms are bad. You need to look at if the ones in your organization are causing a negative impact on people and why, and really kind of try to understand that, name it, identify it, talk to people about it, get input on what's good or bad about it, and then really come up with a way to change the narrative, change how people interact with others in the organization and around these norms. Promote and support minority people. This could be through mentoring, through coaching, through, being on a proactive lookout for additional leadership positions. And if you are in a position to hire, really take a look at people of color. Make sure you have a diverse pool to choose from, and really work on promoting not only the best person for the job, but also make sure that you are also looking at people of color who could be the best person for the job too. Reviewing policies and procedures. A lot of times these policies and procedures kind of reinforce some of the negative impact that happens to people of color in your organization. And a lot of times what really needs to be done is what we call a systems analysis of what it is, which means asking why and why and why. So for example, why are poor people, why are people poor? Is it because of poverty? No. Okay, so well, why is there poverty? Okay, so why did they not have access to that job? Well, why did they not have the skills in order to get that job? Why? Get down to the root cause, and then use that root cause to look at the impact that all of these policies and procedures have, and look at it holistically. It's not just one policy, it's not just one process. They all work interdependently, and something that happens on one side can really impact something that happens on another. So making sure that you're looking at how they interact with each other and how they impact, how they are held accountable to all of these policies and procedures. And then train others. Talk about this in your organizations. Talk about the importance of allyship. You can do great things as one person, but it really is going to take an army of allies to make a lasting and systemic change in this culture. And then for yourself, create what I like to call a mental checklist. And if anybody knows John A. Powell, he is the director of the Othering and Belonging Institute at UC Berkeley. And he really wants to focus on, how am I either othering somebody, I am putting them on the outside of my circle, or how am I building a bridge for them, for us to meet on. And he talks about using a mental checklist to help you identify how you participate in the system and how you may be perpetuating systemic racism. So this is like a series of questions, and these are some examples. These are a series of questions that are going to be personal to you. It might not look like this, it might look like something else. But look at what you can do and what you can ask yourself to try and understand, How is what I'm doing, how is what I'm saying, how is this decision I'm making either contributing to the problem, contributing to the systemic racism, or how is it moving away? How is it disrupting it? Like I said a lot already, this is hard. This is hard work, and you are going to make mistakes. It's inevitable. You will make mistakes. Not everybody has this perfect. I don't have this perfect. You know, Michelle Obama doesn't have this perfect. Beyonce doesn't have this perfect. There are, it is hard, and there's going to be a lot of mistakes made, and it's going to be uncomfortable, and that's good. Because if you're too comfortable, you're probably not learning very much. You're probably not challenging yourself. Um, so I found this really great example again. It's on that guide to allyship, which is really great. So when you do make a mistake, you really need to be able to act appropriately through acknowledging, apologizing, and accepting accountability. So the example they gave is you accidentally step on somebody's toes. This is a bad way to react. This is the mistake that you're trying to avoid. Centering yourself by saying, I can't believe you think I'm a toe stepper. I'm a good person. Denial that others' experiences are different than your own. I don't mind when people step on my toes. Derailing. Some people don't even have toes. Why aren't we talking about them instead? Refusal to center the impacted as a whole. All toes matter. Tone policing. I'd move my foot if you ask more nicely. Denial that the problem is fixable. Toes getting stepped on is a fact of life. You'll be better off when you accept that. Victim blaming. Well, you shouldn't have been walking around in sandals with all of these people around you in boots. And withdrawing. Well, I thought you wanted my help, but I guess not. So I'm just going to go home. So really kind of looking at who are you centering and how are you acknowledging the pain and how are you acknowledging the impact of what you did, even though it wasn't intentional. Acknowledge and understand the impact. So you stop the instance, you move your foot, right? You'll be asked, you move your foot. Center the impacted. Are you okay? Apologize for the impact, even though you didn't intend it. I'm sorry. Listen to their response and learn, and then stop it. Be accountable. Accept your responsibility in this situation and be careful where you step in the future. Now, I know it's kind of a simplified version of some of these things that we're talking about, but I think it's a really great way to contextualize what that sounds like, right? Well, all toes matter. Sounds a lot crazier, but it still means the same thing as all lives matter. So it's definitely a way for us to really look at what we sound like when we make mistakes and how we devalue the experience of others. So I'm going to leave you with a couple of things. First is action steps. These are all things that you can do right now to start this journey and to start looking at the systemic culture that you are in. First, look at your own biases, discover them. If you haven't taken the Harvard Implicit Association test, please do. It is very, very eye-opening. Find at least one resource you're going to use to continue to educate yourself, whether that was anything on the slide that I gave you, doing your own research on the side. And then again, be aware of the source of the news and media that you consume. Research to verify, what your current media promotes. Create and use that mental checklist. So as you're going through your day, have that mental checklist and say, okay, how is what I'm doing contributing to the problem or disrupting the problem? And then identify a person with whom you can engage in this uncomfortable conversation. Somebody who is different than you, that you can really talk to better understand what is going on, how they feel, and how you can be a better ally to support them. So I'm going to leave you today with a quote from Benjamin Franklin. Well done is better than well said. You have to show your support. You have to actually take some intentional action in order to affect change. Well done is better than well said. So thank you for coming today. I hope that this was informative. I know that there was a spot for questions. I don't know if anybody has any questions or comments. Sin.
Hi, Rebecca. There are no questions at this time, but could you maybe talk a little bit about how in the day-to-day workplace, how you could be an ambassador for people of color?
No, absolutely, absolutely. So a lot of that comes around to being, what I call an upstander or an accomplice. Even it's more than just being an ally. It is really putting yourself out there. So if you are in a meeting and you see a woman of color, and there are several white men, and the woman of color is trying to talk, and the white men keep talking over her, you can say, oh, those are really great idea, guys, but I think Cynthia over here has something that she wants to add. Can we let her finish her thought? So little things like that. It doesn't need to be confrontational. It doesn't need to be argumentative, but it's those little things that provide support and provide space for others. Also, really looking at how you communicate and interact with people. And I know it's really hard, but you really do need to tailor your communication, right? How one person is going to process the information and take that in is going to be different than somebody else. Excuse me. So really be cognizant of how you are interacting with people in different stages of the workplace.
Great. We do have a question that came in. Any suggestions on dealing with organizational white culture norms, specifically defensiveness, in that they refuse to acknowledge they have a pattern of exclusionary practices?
Sure. Oh, that's a tough one, especially if this is somebody who is in some sort of position of power. So really combating defensiveness is, and this is really hard because they have walls up. I think a lot of it will come down to educating them, and trying to make them understand that this isn't necessarily about them. This isn't a slight on them. This isn't a criticism of them. And then really try to show step by step how each part of whatever practice he is doing is disparately impacting somebody. That doesn't necessarily have to be a person of color, but make him understand how each thing he does impacts somebody in a negative way. And have him or her really kind of look internally and see what can we do to disrupt that. And a lot of that's going to be that systems analysis, looking at, okay, here's this policy. This policy says this. Who does that affect? Is that a good effect or is it a bad effect? Okay, now why is it a bad effect? What can we do to make it a good effect? So it's going to get them. It's going to take getting them on board first, really talking to them and appealing to them about the better productivity and the better work and the better results you're going to get when people feel like they are included and that they have value.
Thank you. Okay, I did want to share the CLE code. It is SS2551, S as in Sam, S as in Sam, 2551. Rebecca, thank you so much for taking time out of your day and sharing this with us. And for the attendees, we really hope to see you at some future upcoming webinars. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Have a great week.
Have a wonderful weekend and be well.